This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on this week's programme, the Chief Returning Officer enlightens us about the upcoming elections.
Basically, we have 8 different elections that will take place on the same day. We have over 7,000 candidates for these elections.
And a book launch this week lifts the lid on America's influence in Cyprus in the 60s and 70s.
This was right at the end of Watergate, just before Nixon's resignation, when the drunk president was wandering around the White House talking to portraits and grabbing Kissinger and making him get down on his knees and pray with him. And I mean, it's not like Kissinger wasn't distracted.
We have elections coming up in less than a month. So let's talk about what we should be thinking about and what we should be doing. These elections are very different from any that have gone before in Cyprus, at least as far as I'm aware, because not only are we choosing our members of the European Parliament, we're also choosing local officials, but they've changed after the reform of our local authorities, and we're also choosing school boards. It's very confusing for me, so I've asked Menelaos Vasiliou, who is the Chief Returning Officer, to join me on this week's programme and hopefully bring everything to clarity. Menelaos, thank you very much for your time. Can you start by explaining how these have changed, particularly considering the government reforms of local authorities, because it seems that we're going to be voting for, a couple of hundred people?
Yeah, basically we have 8 different elections that will take place on the same day. They are the local authorities elections and the elections for the members of the European Parliament. So we have over 3,000 elected people that are going to be elected by the voters on the same day. And now we have over 7,000 people that are
candidates.
Yes, for these elections. Yeah.
That's a lot of people. How are we going to know who we should be voting for? And of course, before the elections, we need to have access to who these people are, what their, I suppose, could you call them priorities are, so that we know who we want to vote for. Where can we find that out?
As we're getting the ballots as the ballots are getting ready, they're going to be published on the elections website. This is the elections.gov.cy. So people will get to know the different ballots. At the same time, we have the electronic service, What Do I Vote, that has been activated during the last 4 or 7 days, where people can get to register to that service and get information about the different ballots they're going to have on the elections day based on their registration to the electoral rolls.
So let me get that right. If I put in either my ID card number or my voting booklet number, it will tell me, presumably, where I need to go to vote and who I can vote for, because not everybody, for example, can vote for the local officials. For example, European citizens who aren't citizens of Cyprus can vote for the MEPs only, I think.
Yeah, the information that will be given, it is based on the electoral roll that the voter is registered. So it varies according to that, according to the electoral roll that people are registered.
Now, where can I find out what these people stand for? I know that isn't really your remit, but it would be very helpful if we go to elections.gov.cy. I did look earlier and it has a thing that says candidates, but at the moment that's blank.
Yes, because the ballots are getting ready at the present time, so they will be uploaded during the next days as they are getting ready. That's why they are not in there yet.
Can I just say, when you say ballots, are you talking about we will see the sort of ballot papers that we will be expected to fill out, and that will have the candidates' names, but it won't tell us any more about them? Does it say about political parties or have links to those parties so we can find out what, as I said, they stand for? I mean, somebody's priorities in one party may be very different from another's.
Some candidates belong to political parties, some are independent candidates. That information is printed on the ballot. And on the same website, there are links to the political parties' websites. If someone wants
and what about the independent candidates? Because I think particularly for is it district governors that they're calling them now? A lot of those are maybe endorsed by a political party but standing as independents. So where do we find what they're going to do?
If someone is an independent, on the ballot paper will be written as independent candidate. We don't have information for each person. Because there are so many persons, there are over 5,000 candidates. So each one of them, I understand that it may have their personal website and publish their information for the elections. That is not in the scope of the elections website, of the government elections website.
Now, it's going to be a headache for you guys, isn't it, once the ballots close? How long do you think it's going to take, compared to previous elections, to count all these ballots and come up with some idea, hopefully before midnight it used to be, of who's been elected?
I believe we are going to have final results for the members of the European Parliament by midnight. We cannot announce the results before midnight because every country has to be finished with the voting procedure to announce the result for the members of the European Parliaments. And by the information we have by now, Italy is going to finish the voting procedure around midnight. So around midnight, we are going to be able to announce the final results for that election. And I believe by midnight or 1 o'clock, we are going to have, let's say, 80% or 90% results for all of the rest elections. But the final results will be announced most probably next day in the morning.
Okay, so we've got the school boards, we've got the municipal councillors, we've now also got not just mayors, but deputy mayors as well, haven't we? Yes.
This is a part of the local authorities reform that took place in 2022. Now, because we have the mayors that are being elected at municipality level, and we have the deputy mayors elected at the level of municipal district.
Oh, it's all very confusing to me. So there's a difference between the actual municipality, and that's the council, and the districts.
Yes, let's. If you would like, we can take an example.
Yes, do please.
The Nicosia municipality will have a mayor of Nicosia and members of the school board of Nicosia elected at the municipality level. Now, we have 4 municipal districts in Nicosia municipality. We have Ayos Dometios, Engomi, Aglanja, and Nicosia municipal districts. All of these districts are going to elect deputy mayors and municipal councillors at that level of the municipal district.
All right. Is there anything that I've neglected to ask you about that we should know about? Anybody we've missed out?
No, I think we can say that each voter will take up to 6 ballot papers according to the electoral roll that is being registered. And every ballot paper will have different color, so to be easily recognizable for the voters to vote. The voting center and all will be
It's going to take
same.
each person voting much longer, isn't it, to fill out 6 different ballot papers with lots of different names on than it was in the past. So how long do you think each person will be spending behind the booth? Let's assume and hope that before they actually turn up to the voting station, that they will have had an idea of who they're going to vote for and just be able to put their ticks in the boxes.
It will take around 5 minutes. It depends on the voter, but it will take somewhere between 3 and 6 minutes. Let's say. Yeah.
And does that mean that you've got more voting stations now so that there aren't huge long queues, or are you going to stick to the old system?
No, we're going to have a lot of more stations, voting stations. It will be around 2,000 voting stations. That is 30% more than the local authorities elections that took place in 2016.
So you think that all the results will come out pretty much the same, and people definitely need to check where, because they may not be voting at the same place they did last time round.
Yeah, that's why they have to use the electronic service. Where do I vote? It will be available by next weekend, by the next Saturday, to get the form for the voting center that will be they will be able to vote.
I have to ask you this. I know we should all read, write and speak Greek, and I can just, but there are a lot of people who can't. Do you have this information in English so people don't end up going to the wrong place and then having to go across town to somewhere else?
Yes, it will be available in English and in Turkish as well. Yes.
The official languages of the Republic. Well, Menelaos, I wish you the very best of luck with your presumably much larger contingent of staff to make sure everything goes smoothly on June the 9th, and many thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is Menelaos Vassiliou, who is the Chief Returning Officer for our upcoming elections.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Earlier this week, the book American Dreams, the story of the Cyprus Fulbright Commission, was launched here in Cyprus. It was launched first in Limassol and then last night in Nicosia. Keith E. Peterson is the author, and he joins us on this week's programme. Keith, for as long as I can remember, the Fulbright Commission was here, but it is no longer, and I think your book looks at the whole history from the very beginning up until its demise. Tell us a little bit about it.
Absolutely. I mean, the Commission was founded in 1962, and it was part of a large package of programs and aid that was given to Cyprus after it gained independence from the UK. This included a USAID mission. It included donations from CARE, which was providing milk and meals to 85,000 Cypriot school children. There was donations of grain. There were Peace Corps volunteers here, and one of the other things that was set up was a Fulbright Commission in 1962, and it was a modest little commission with a budget of about $100,000 a year, which today would be just short of $1 million. And they gave, say, about 15 scholarships a year, both graduate and undergraduate, and brought American scholars here. There were no universities, so these scholars acted as consultants to the government. And sent a few Cypriots to the U.S. for training. And they also managed a program that sent about a dozen Cypriots a year to the American University in Beirut, which ended in the mid-1980s when 2 Greek Cypriot students were kidnapped by Abu Nidal, and only Yasser Arafat's intervention freed them, and they ended up pursuing their studies in America.
Why was America interested in little old Cyprus?
Well, we certainly had strategic interests. We certainly did not want the 2 mother countries, Greece and Turkey, to come to blows over this place, weakening the southern flank of NATO. We were concerned about the power of Akel. We did not want Cyprus to become the Cuba of the Mediterranean. we shared the listening facilities on this island with Britain's GCHQ. This is part of the Five Eyes. And in the 60s, certainly, we had a very large contingent of Americans, in the hundreds of intelligence officers, military and otherwise, working on the British bases. And of course, that changed through the years because technology changed, like satellites and that sort of thing. But certainly in the 60s, and there's a memo in my book from President Kennedy to Secretary of State Dean Rusk saying that the U.S. needed to put some resources into Cyprus so that we could hold on to it. And of course, let's be clear, Archbishop Makarios expected the Americans, he expected the British to provide £20 million, and he expected the Americans to provide $20 million, which would be about a little more than 200 million today. And we were prepared to give much more than that, and then we didn't, because Makarios couldn't get his act together. And Ambassador Wilkins, our first ambassador, was incredibly bitter about that.
So what was this money going to be spent on?
Oh, gosh, just development in Cyprus, roads,
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, yeah. That's what it was spent on, and that money disappeared very quickly, up until then after 1974, suddenly there was a lot of money back with a vengeance, and that's a very serendipitous story where that money came from.
So let's get back to the Fulbright Commission, because it also had a lot of, shall we say, collaboration with the Archaeological Research Centre, for example. I mean, it spread its wings somewhat, didn't it? It wasn't just sending students.
It gave grants to the American Academy in Larnaca. It sent kids to the American Farm School in Thessaloniki. And the founding in the early 70s of, it was delayed by the war. In the later 70s of the Cyprus American Archaeological Research Institute, I've just rotated off the board of CARI after 6 years. And the commission paid the salaries of the directors. And after 1 year, the American Society of Overseas Research was going to end the experiment in Cyprus. They were saying, no, we just don't have the money, we can't support it. And the executive director of the commission, Renos Kamenos, the first CARI director here, Anita Walker, Dr. Walker, said, Renos threw down his cigarette and said, this is an insult to Cyprus. And they got Vasos Karagiorgis, the director of the Department of Antiquities, and the American ambassador, and they all pushed back, and CARI stayed alive. And then they eventually gave money for the establishment of CARI's library, and they gave money for the purchase of the house that CARI is in today. So, And, of course, the most important thing they did is dozens and dozens of archaeologists came to work in Cyprus on Fulbright grants.
Right, cynics would say that this is America buying Cyprus in a way. What would you say to that? Because I know all big big countries do something similar, but there is a quid pro quo, isn't there?
Well, there isn't, in the sense that the first USAID director here, Joseph Toner, he gave an interview to the Cyprus News Agency, and he was very upfront and said, we're giving this money to promote American interests. And that caused a little bit of a stir, but, I'd say, yes, of course, but there's a certain amount of altruism in it as well, baked into it. And the other thing is that, you can give all the money you want and stuff, but at the end of the day, it's Cypriots who decide. The commission spent millions of dollars on conflict resolution work, and one of the professors who came here from Harvard, Diana Chigas, said, the Cypriots chewed up and spit out everybody, including Holbrook. So, it's not like we could compel the Cypriots to necessarily do, what we wanted. Now, as far as the strategic facilities on the island, Makarios said, of course your facilities will be welcomed here. He says, but you're going to have to pay us something because we're going to be poor, right? Now, we wanted to set up at the southeastern tip a transmitter for Voice of America. And Makarios ended up asking for double what VOA, Voice of America, normally paid. And we said, nope, sorry, and we set it up in Rhodes. So, it's
bartering, basically, wasn't it? People trying to get something for their side.
Right.
Do you think that it was successful? And why, actually, did the commission close down? Was it paying too much and not getting the returns?
No, that wasn't it. At the end of the day, what made the commission would not have survived in the form that it survived in if not for the CAS program, the Cyprus American Scholarship Program. After the war, in the summer of 1974, there was a man named Eugene Rosides in the United States. He had been the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Enforcement in the Nixon administration, but now he was forming a lobbying organization called the American Hellenic Institute. And he was furious about what had happened in Cyprus, and he wanted an arms embargo against Turkey. Now, he's a Republican, but the Democrats control the Congress. So he found himself in a room with Representative Paul Sarbanes, Representative John Bradamus, both Greek Americans, Representative Ed Derwinski, and an aide to Senator Tom Eagleton named Andy Manitos, who has become one of the most powerful lobbyists in Washington. And as these guys were leaving, going out the door, Rosides yelled, "Hey, these people, the Cypriots, need money." And they turned around and they said, "Well, how much?" And he said, "I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't talked to anybody, so I just threw a number off the top of my head." And I said, $50 million, which is like $300 million today. And he says, "We got $25 million, and then after that it was $15 million. And between 1975 and 1979, USAID came in here and built 30,000 homes, the Makarios Hospital in Larnaca, orphanages, old folks' homes, roads, everything. And then we got to the point where Cyprus didn't need the money, but the Greek lobby was insistent. And so what do you do with the money? And so Ambassador Galen Stone and Senator Claiborne Pell had a conversation and decided to set up a scholarship program called the CASP. One of the reasons we did that is because there were too many kids who were the children of AKEL members going off to the University of Moscow and going to the East Bloc. So this is very much Cold War, and at least that was the justification. And so they started the CASP, and everybody thought the $5 million they got in 1981. By the way, the government of Cyprus was opposed to this program. They wanted the money spent on infrastructure where politicians could have their picture taken with shovels full of dirt and stuff. But the ambassador pushed, and the CASP was set up. And everybody thought that $5 million was a one-off, right? And the next year, 5 million more showed up. And the next year after that, 5 million more. And there was an official with the American partner called Amid East. And she said, for one of these programs to last 5 years in Washington is a miracle. This lasted 33 years, and in constant dollars, we gave the Cypriots more than $250 million for the education of their people. We trained half the doctors on this island through short-term training grants who went and studied, infant cardiology and transplant work and everything else. The Cyprus Institute for Neurology and Genetics, they got like 25 of these short-term grants. And of course, it was USAID money that founded SING. So, because the 15 million, 5 million went to the CASP. 10 million was spent on other things, the reconstruction of St. Mamas, the reconstruction of Nicosia's sewer and water system.
What was the reaction of your audience when you presented these facts and the book?
Well, they're just, particularly the young people, had no clue, right? But even older people wouldn't have known because the money was run through the UN. And besides, after 1974, particularly Greek Cypriots were very angry with us. They believed that we could have stopped the Turkish invasion or that we had precipitated the coup or, and so they wanted to give us no credit whatsoever. I mean, before they opened the Makarios Hospital in Larnaca, there was this huge fight. We wanted a brass plaque that said, "This hospital is a gift from the American people to the people of Cyprus," and the government of Cyprus said no, right? And then the ambassador said, well, then there's not going to be a hospital that's opening. And they argued and argued. They even had an argument for a couple of weeks over the size of the lettering. But finally, and one of my former colleagues, she says every time she goes down there, she stops by the hospital to make sure the plaque is still there and that they haven't moved it to a bathroom or something like that, So, people didn't know because the money moved through the UN.
But there is still a lot of animosity. I mean, I think of when you hear some of the older generation talking about Kissinger, for example. I mean, there is a lot of animosity about the role that America did or did not play in 1974. Is that covered at all?
What I say in the book is that it's beyond the scope of this book to litigate that. I said, but I recognize how people felt at the time. I quote the Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, who says now that the archives have been open, we find that Kissinger was rather ill-informed. And let's remember what was going on in Washington at that moment. This was right at the end of Watergate, just before Nixon's resignation, when the drunk president was wandering around the White House talking to portraits and grabbing Kissinger and making him get down on his knees and pray with him. And I mean, it's not like Kissinger wasn't distracted. There's a story in the book from Ambassador James Williams, the Special Cyprus Coordinator, former, and he was at an event in the 1990s for the World Bank, and Kissinger was there. And in the audience was Thomas Boyat, who was the Cyprus desk officer in 1974. And Boyat got up and asked a question that had nothing to do with Cyprus, it had to do with NATO. And Kissinger said, he says, "I remember you writing some memos that were very prescient," and he said, "and they should have been given more attention than they were." And Ambassador Williams said, "That's the closest thing to an apology you'll ever get out of Kissinger for not paying closer attention." But that's pretty much the only thing. When Neil Ferguson's second volume of the Kissinger biography comes out, there's going to be stuff in there about Cyprus. So we'll see.
Looking back over your connection with the island, because you served in the embassy here, you've got the contacts with the commission, you're back here again, you come and go, I believe.
Researching this book, yes. There were about 5 research trips.
What are your feelings, finally, about this island and the role that America has played over the years?
Well, you have an educated, just because of this serendipitous accident of history, you have an educated class here that owe their education to the commission and the grants. There were nearly 2,000 CAS grants. There were another 600 Fulbright grants. There were nearly 1,000 short-term training grants. And there were maybe 3,000 people involved in the conflict resolution work.
Yeah, we didn't have time really to talk about the bicommunal aspect of Fulbright, but it did deal as well, didn't it?
It did, and although the woman named Marian Angelica who came here and studied the bicommunal work, when she left after 13 months, she said, "I was quite sad, because what I found is that when I got there, when they started the work, I felt that Cyprus had 2 tribes, Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and now they had 3 tribes. They had Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, and bicommunalists, but they were completely separate."
That is unfortunately a very appropriate place to end our chat, because I'm not sure that a great deal has changed since then, despite the passing of the years. We've been talking to Keith E. Peterson, the author of American Dreams, the story of Cyprus Fulbright Commission. You can find it in all good bookshops, and it is well worth the read. Keith, many thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so very much.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.